I saw a dark figure standing before the front door of my bedroom. It stood as rigid as a statue. What is the scariest story you know that is 100% true? I lived alone with my dogs in a brownstone in a gated community in uptown Dallas. I worked a few miles away but came home every day for lunch to let my dogs out. After living there for about a year, I started smelling men's cologne really strong in my entryway and up my stairs. I figured it was my neighbor next door and didn't think anything of it. Then one day I found a dollar bill folded lengthwise on top of my purse. I never carry cash, nor have I ever folded a dollar bill lengthwise. Thought it was weird. A few weeks later I came home and both my dogs were standing in front of my bedroom door wagging their tails and staring at the door. I figured they wanted to lay on my bed, but I was in a hurry and walked them real fast and went back to work. When I came home that day there were 20 or so dollar bills folded lengthwise and placed neatly around various surfaces in my room. Never in my life have I been so terrified. I grabbed my dogs and noped the hell out of that place as fast as I could. I called the cops, they came out, my locks were changed, but I could never be there alone again. I moved a month or so later. When I moved, I found dollar bills taped to the back of pictures on my walls, under furniture, and random places. I never figured out who or why or even how. I think the scariest thing of all is knowing that day when I was home, whoever had been going into my house was waiting quietly in my room, folding dollar bills, and my little dogs knew it. The story of Jamie Kloss is terrifying. In rural Wisconsin last year, a 13-year-old girl went missing after her parents were murdered in their home. Police arrived within 4 minutes or so, but she is just gone. Of course, speculation is that she was kidnapped, or that she was in on it, or dead, or whatever. Nobody knows because she has completely vanished. 88 days later, in the dead of a northern Wisconsin winter, she runs out into the street to a woman walking her dog. She had been held captive about 40 minutes from her home. All of that is scary enough, but here's the terrifying part. She had never had any contact with the guy that murdered her family and abducted her. One day he was driving to a new job, at which he only lasted a day, and saw her get on the school bus. At that moment he decided that he was going to take her. There was no warning. No grooming. There was absolutely nothing that she or her family could have done to avoid everything. A creepy young man saw her from 100 feet away and decided that he would murder her family and take her for himself. I was walking in the woods once when I saw a blue tent, or what had once been a tent. It was torn to shreds and the poles were snapped and it was all in a messy pile in the middle of a clearing. From a distance, it had looked like this clearing was full of cream-colored flowers, but as I got closer I realized they were pieces of paper. Pages from Stephen King's The Shining, to be precise. They were charred around the outside as though someone had set light to them, and the fact that they were individual made it look like someone had really wanted to destroy the book. I shrugged it off. It was a very neat setup for whatever project the film students from the nearby school would be making, I told myself. Very well done, guys, very creepy. It made the news shortly afterwards that a man from the next town over who had been missing for a long time had finally turned up. Dead. In his blue tent in the woods. I don't know if he was still in there when I walked past. I don't want to know. I was probably 11 or 12. There was a telephone pole in our backyard that stood in the middle of our back fence. An electrician was working on it and needed access to our backyard for a couple days. One of the nights, my best friend was over for a sleepover, and we were in the fort we made in my room. I was facing toward her, away from my bedroom door, and she gets startled and lets put kind of a half-hearted scream. She said she thought for a split second she saw a man's face peering between the sheets through the entrance to our fort. We both felt really creeped out the rest of the night but just fell asleep eventually. The next day or so my family realized that 2 of our motor scooters we kept in the back were missing, and sometime later my dad recognized the electrician on Sacramento's Top 10 Wanted. I'm pretty sure that night was the night he stole the scooters and he must have come inside the house through the back door and left or something when he realized we were awake. This was probably a story on the news, but my dad's coworkers came across materials to make a bomb in someone's luggage at the airport he works at. It turns out there was a suicidal IT student that wasn't planning on hurting anyone. He just wanted to assemble the bomb when he got to his destination and then try to kill himself. I heard that he's doing better now, but it's still pretty scary. 6 years ago I lived in an apartment with my girlfriend. I was lying in bed with her, and awoke around 3 a.m. The bedroom door was open, and through the doorway you could see into the kitchen. Above the sink in the kitchen was a rectangular hole that made a bit of an indoor window to see the front door, as the kitchen itself was enclosed. When I awoke, I looked around, took a sip of water, placed it back on the nightstand. My eyes fell on my girlfriend, who was fast asleep and probably the most precious-looking sleeper in the entire world. I smiled. I was happy. I then heard an abrupt creak from the living room. I swiveled my head to look out the bedroom door from my bed. Through that little rectangular window above the sink, I saw a dark figure standing before the front door. Arms limply swayed beside its still body, which stood as rigid as a statue. With a shudder of disbelief, I blinked. In that split second, this thing was now looking through the window, above the sink. But I still couldn't make out any of its features. I thought I was just seeing things. My heart began to pound. Blink, it was in the kitchen now. Standing there. Its whole body facing me. I could now make out wisps of hair dangling from her head. Blink, a hand was now clutching the doorframe, and only her head peeked around the side. She gazed at me. Almost into me. Like a starving prisoner catching sight of a plate of food, her head cocked before her body as if there was something in me she wanted. Something she desperately needed. Something she would take. I started breathing fast. My hands clutching the sheets to grab for my girlfriend. Blink, it stood before the bed. Head cocked, her gaunt form standing slightly crooked, with tattered garments hanging from her shoulders. Blink, a skeletal visage loomed above my face. Pitted eyes gazed into mine above a near lipless mouth contorted in a perpetually sad, but mocking grin. Yellow teeth parted, and a strained but inexorable bellow of anger and grief filled my ears, as I stared, wide-eyed, into the depthless, terrible maw. The sound built into a deafening roar. I squeezed my teary eyes shut. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could. And I opened my eyes, to see my girlfriend waking up to my screams. The woman in rags was gone. After a cross-country meet, my team's bus finally made it back to school pretty late at night. Not quite midnight, but pretty close. As a team we all celebrated our victory together very briefly before heading out with our respective families, however. I was one of the only athletes on that trip who had their own car. So I made the long walk down to the student parking lot with another runner that I promised to drop off on my way home. We were talking about the meet, how she finally hit her PR, and how she appreciated me driving her home this late up till we got to my car and loaded our school stuff in the trunk. I went ahead and cranked up my car while she finished put her stuff away, when the passenger side door is thrown open and she jumps in screaming, "Drive bro monster." Given her hysteria, I didn't ask why and I just slammed on the pedal and we sped out of the parking lot. While we were exiting the parking lot, I saw a flash of what looked like two glowing red eyes like the headlights were reflecting a wild animal's eyes, and what I assumed to be teeth reflecting light similarly to the eyes only white. Naturally, this sent me into what was essentially a pseudo-panic state. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would crush my lungs, everything was a blur, and it was like my limbs were on autopilot. I couldn't feel my hands gripping the steering wheel, but there is still a section on it that is missing the fake leather because of how hard I was gripping it or something. Luckily it seems that my body wouldn't allow my passenger to be hurt by my panic. We managed to drive a good ways away and turn onto the highway that runs close by our school and then turned off at an open gas station to recover. As it turns out, my trunk was still open and we lost most of our school supplies in the mad dash out of the school. My friend almost wouldn't talk to me, she was trembling so bad, but I managed to get her side of the account out of her. Apparently she saw something in the football field the parking lot was adjacent to. At first she thought it was a large buck grazing on the grass, but when I cranked up my car, it stood up and turned to face us. Standing up, her best description she could think of was if Slender Man had deer antlers and was more muscle-bound. After we were both recovered enough, I drove her home and agreed to go back to school that afternoon since it was a weekend, to make sure there was actually something there. I couldn't sleep barely any that night. I hoarded a variety of weapons close to my bed, and set up Pornhub to calm myself down and distract my mind. When the next morning came around, the girl and I waited until it was well into the day before I went to pick her up. With a newfound courage that came with the sunlight, and the somewhat illegal possession of 20-gauge shotgun on school property, we arrived at the parking lot to find all of our stuff torn to shreds like a pack of animals were looking for food. We've never had any problems with people disappearing in my area either before or since that day, and no one else had seen anything else like that. So both of us decided to write it off as a trick of tired minds and some wild animals. We still occasionally contact each other when we have to go out in the dark for some moral support, and as far as I know, we both carry at least a pocket knife. When I was about 13, I was an adventure explorer wannabe. I used to pack a tent and survival gear to go camping up the hill about 4 miles from my house, elevated 1,200 feet. I set up my tent in this small field almost entirely surrounded by woods. I made my beans, went to sleep. I was woken up at 3 a.m. to the sound of what I thought was a wild animal approaching the tent, not unusual. Woke up at sunrise, opened the tent and found a parcel wrapped in white aged cloth, tied in straw string with a note on top, "Welcome friend." Inside the parcel, get this, a calf leg/hoof. Never told a soul about it to this day. Scared the soul out of me. Never went camping again, and didn't stop thinking about it for months. My uncle, when he was in his teens, witnessed a UFO event. He was at the beach in the middle of the day when he saw an oval-shaped object about half a kilometer up in the sky. He said that everyone, there were over 100 other people at the beach, and they all witnessed this, could see that the object was huge, big enough that if it had come down, it would have flattened the entire beach. Everyone watched it for about half an hour, and during that time it didn't move one bit. Heaps of people were just standing or sitting around, watching it. My uncle said, and this is an almost direct quote, "You know how you sometimes feel like you just have to get out of a place, like you have to take off running? Well, this was different. You felt the opposite, like you had to stay." After half an hour, the object started moving very slowly, and then it just shot sideways extremely fast and disappeared. No plane or human-made flying object could have moved in that way, or looked like that, unless the government was or is developing technologies we know nothing of, a strong possibility. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more creepy videos. Click the right box for the creepy Reddit videos playlist. Share your own scary story in the comments below.